The morning fog had lifted just enough to reveal the restless sea, its waves surging like the turmoil brewing between Elias and Marin. The lighthouse keeper stood rigid on the rocky shore, his hands clenched at his sides, eyes fixed on the traveler who paced before him, her footsteps uneven against the jagged stones. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Elias's voice broke through the salty air, raw with hurt. "You knew how much the wreck meant to me, how much it still does. And yet you kept your own connection hidden, like it was some secret shame." Marin halted abruptly, the wind tugging at her auburn hair, shadows playing across her freckled face. "It's not that simple," she said, voice trembling yet defiant. "You think I wanted to come back here, to this town that holds nothing but ghosts for me? I was running, Elias. Running from the past you and I both share but refuse to face." The waves crashed louder, as if echoing the rising tension. Elias stepped closer, his gaze piercing. "Running won't save you. It never did. We're both tethered to that night, to the wreck. We can either drown in it together or find a way to swim free." Marin's eyes glistened, a mixture of anger and pain swirling within. "How do you expect me to trust you? After all this time, after all the silence?" The question hung between them like a fragile thread. Elias swallowed hard, the weight of unspoken regrets pressing down. "I don't expect anything," he admitted, "except that we try. For once, we don't turn away from the truth." Inside the lighthouse, the dim light flickered as shadows danced across the worn wooden walls. Marin and Elias sat opposite each other, the space between them filled with a heavy quiet. The ghostly hum of the sea beyond seeped through the thick stone, a reminder of the depths they both carried inside. Marin finally broke the silence. "I was afraid that if I told you everything, you wouldn't understand, that you'd see me as weak, or worse, blame me." Elias shook his head slowly. "I blame no one. I only wish you'd let me in, so we could share this burden instead of bearing it alone." The fragile trust they had begun to build felt suddenly exposed, vulnerable as the lighthouse in a storm. Marin stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I need air," she whispered, escaping down the narrow staircase and out into the cold morning. Outside, the cliff's edge beckoned, the ocean stretching endlessly beneath a sky heavy with grey clouds. Marin's breaths came fast, her heart pounding as she wrestled with the whirlwind of emotions. The sea's relentless rhythm matched the turmoil inside her, push and pull between anger, grief, and a flicker of hope. Back inside, Elias pressed his palm against the cold glass of the lighthouse window, watching raindrops begin to trace patterns down the pane. His reflection merged with the storm beyond, a mirror of his conflicted soul. "We have to face the currents," he murmured to himself, "or be swept away forever." As the rain intensified, so did their need for honesty. To navigate the treacherous waters of their shared past and uncertain future, the crossing currents of their lives, once threatening to drown them, now offered a chance frail but real to anchor in each other's truth. And just as the storm outside refused to relent, neither would they quit the fight for something deeper, something worth the scars. But the question remained, would trust, once broken, hold strong enough to withstand the tides still to come? The fog was lifting again, but the path ahead was still shrouded in mist. Elias and Marin stood at the edge, hearts laid bare, ready to weather whatever storms awaited. The sea whispered its ancient secrets, but this time they were listening together. Elias stood at the edge of the harbor, the late morning sun filtering through a soft haze that blurred the line between sea and sky. The usual grey fog had lifted for the first time in days, revealing the gentle sway of fishing boats tied to weathered docks and the distant cry of seagulls circling overhead. He pulled his sweater tighter around his frame, the salt air cool but inviting after the storm's harshness. Mara approached with a slow, steady step, the gravel crunching softly beneath her boots. Her sea-green eyes caught the light, shimmering with a mixture of relief and lingering sorrow. "It's a good day," she said, voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of something unspoken. "It is," Elias replied, motioning toward a worn wooden bench by the pier's edge. A quiet harbor, perfect for forgetting the world for a while. They sat together, shoulders just brushing, eyes fixed on the harbor's glassy surface, reflecting the sun's golden rays. The air was filled with the scent of brine and wildflowers growing in cracks between stones. For a moment, words seemed unnecessary. The silence between them was a fragile truce, a shared refuge from the storms both inside and out. Mara broke the quiet first, her voice soft but steady. "I never thought I'd find a day like this here, Elias. Somewhere I could breathe without the weight of everything pulling me under." He turned to her, a slow smile breaking the usual stoicism etched on his face. "The sea has a way of reminding us there's always a calm after the storm. Sometimes we just have to wait for it." She nodded, her gaze drifting to the horizon where a lone fishing boat bobbed gently. "Do you think we could find that calm together?" Elias's heart quickened, not from hope, but from the cautious possibility it presented. "I want to believe that. I want to believe we can learn to trust again, even after everything we've lost." Their conversation drifted to lighter memories. Elias shared tales of his grandfather, who once tended the lighthouse with a laugh that could chase away the darkest fog. Mara laughed, the sound ringing clear and true, a balm to the wounds they both carried. The warmth between them grew, fragile but undeniable. As afternoon bled into evening, the harbor transformed. Lanterns flickered to life, casting shimmering reflections that danced upon the water's surface. The scent of salt mingled with wood smoke from nearby chimneys, and the gentle slap of waves against the pier became a steady rhythm. Elias reached out, hesitating only a moment before his hand found Mara's. The contact was electric and comforting all at once. Promise, without words, that they were no longer alone in their grief. "Whatever comes next," Mara whispered, "I want to face it with you." Elias squeezed her hand, his voice thick with emotion. "Me too. The past may haunt us, but maybe love can be the light that guides us through." The harbor around them softened under the twilight, a quiet sanctuary where two broken souls dared to dream of healing. For the first time since the wreck, the ocean's endless horizon didn't feel like a threat, but an invitation. And as night settled, the lighthouse's beam swept across the water steady, unwavering, a beacon of hope for what lay ahead. But even as peace embraced them, shadows lingered at the edges of their hearts. Could the fragile trust they built withstand the tides yet to come? Only time would tell, as the harbor held its breath, waiting. Elias and Mara remained seated on the pier, fingers intertwined, watching the last light fade from the sky. The silence was no longer empty, but filled with quiet promise. In that harbor of hope, love began to bloom anew. The sky darkened suddenly that afternoon, an ominous blanket of charcoal clouds swallowing the horizon. The air thickened with the salty temps of an impending tempest, and Elias felt the familiar tightening in his chest, warning born from years guarding the lighthouse against nature's fury. He moved swiftly, securing loose equipment and double-checking the lantern's mechanisms. The lighthouse groaned beneath the rising wind, its sturdy frame a lone sentinel battered by the brewing storm. Outside, Mara watched from the edge of the cliff, her hair plastered to her face by the relentless drizzle. The harbor below churned violently. Boats that once swayed gently now thrashed against their moorings like trapped creatures. She shivered, not from the cold alone, but from the raw power of the ocean unleashed. The storm was more than weather. It was a reckoning. "Elias," she called out, voice nearly lost to the howl of the wind. "Do you think the lighthouse will hold?" He glanced back, eyes sharp despite the fatigue. "It has to. It's the town's heart." Rain lashed at them both, drumming a relentless rhythm that echoed their rising anxiety. As the first lightning forked across the sky, the world seemed to hold its breath. When the storm finally hit in full force, the lighthouse stood firm, but not without cost. Windows rattled under the assault, and the ground around the base became a mudslide of debris and seawater. Elias and Mara retreated inside, the interior dim except for the flickering lantern light. They worked in tandem, repairing minor damages and checking the integrity of the structure, their movements practiced yet strained. As dawn broke, the storm's grip loosened, revealing a town battered but unbroken. The harbor was a chaos of splintered wood and tangled nets. Boats were overturned or missing, carried away by the surging tides. The salt air was thick with the scent of wet earth and something deeper loss. Elias stepped outside, boots sinking into the soggy ground, eyes scanning the ruined skyline. Mara joined him, placing a steadying hand on his arm. "It's hard to see it like this," she admitted softly. He nodded, voice low, "But it's still here. We'll fix it." Their resolve was tested further as the town convened in the community hall. Mayor Thompson's voice was steady as he spoke of damage assessments and recovery efforts, but the worry etched on his face mirrored the unspoken fears of all present. Old Man Harris shared tales of storms past, reminding the town of their resilience. In the days that followed, Elias and Mara worked side by side, clearing debris, repairing docks, and restoring the lighthouse's beacon. Each task was a testament to survival, a stitch mending the fabric of their community and themselves. Through exhaustion and fleeting moments of laughter, their bond deepened, a fragile hope against the lingering shadows. Yet, beneath the surface, questions stirred. Could the lighthouse and their hearts withstand the changes ahead? Would the scars left by the storm fade or define them? As twilight settled over the recovering town, Elias and Mara stood once more at the cliff's edge, watching the ocean calm to a gentle murmur. The horizon stretched wide and promising, a reminder that after every storm, a new day dawns. "We're not alone," Mara whispered. "No," Elias agreed, "and neither is this town." The beacon's light pierced the growing darkness, a steady pulse of hope against the vast, uncertain sea. Together, they faced the future not without fear, but with a shared strength forged in the storm's wake. The night had settled over the coastal town like a soft blanket, thick fog rolling in from the ocean, swallowing the cliffs and shrouding the lighthouse in a ghostly veil. Mara pulled her coat tighter around her, the cold bite of the sea wind threading through the fabric. She stood at the edge of the rocky shore, where jagged stones met the relentless surf, watching as the waves crashed with a furious grace. The mist blurred the horizon, but in that obscurity, something else stirred a flicker of movement, a whisper from the depths. Her breath came out in shallow puffs, mingling with the salty air. It was as if the fog itself carried voices from the past that pulsed beneath the surface of the present. She closed her eyes briefly, and the world shifted. Suddenly, vivid images flooded her mind, shards of a memory not entirely her own but deeply familiar. The creaking timbers of a ship torn apart by savage waves, screams swallowed by the roaring ocean, lanterns flickering helplessly against the storm's wrath. Faces emerged, pale and desperate, reaching out in silent pleas. Mara's heart clenched as the vision washed over her, bringing with it a profound ache that tethered her to the long-lost souls of the wreck. A sudden chill ran down her spine, and she opened her eyes to find the fog thickening, swirling like a living thing around her. In the distance, a faint glow appeared, a spectral ship gliding silently across the water, its form shimmering and elusive. Mara reached out instinctively, fingers trembling, as if she could touch the ephemeral vessel and bridge the divide between worlds. Behind her, footsteps crunched softly on the gravel. Elias approached, his figure emerging from the mist with cautious concern etched on his face. "Mara," he called gently, his voice steady yet laced with uncertainty. "You shouldn't be out here alone." She turned to him, eyes wide and shimmering with unshed tears. "I had to see," she whispered. "I had to know if the stories were true, if the ghosts still linger." Elias hesitated, the lighthouse keeper's practical mind wrestling with the palpable weight of the moment. He had tended the beacon for years, a sentinel against the sea's dangers, but the supernatural had always been a realm he approached with skeptical distance. Yet, seeing Mara's haunted expression and the raw vulnerability that trembled beneath her words, his resolve softened. "Come inside," he said, gesturing toward the lighthouse. "Warm yourself by the fire." Inside the lighthouse, the amber glow of the lantern cast long shadows along the worn wooden walls. The scent of salt and aged timber mingled with the faint aroma of burning pine. Mara sank into a creaking armchair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Elias knelt beside her, his gaze steady and reassuring. "Tell me what you saw," he urged gently. Her voice quivered as she began to recount the vision fragments of the ship's final night. The desperate scramble of sailors, the icy grip of the ocean claiming its victims. She spoke of faces she recognized, names whispered in the town's old legends, and a sorrow that felt almost like her own. Elias listened, the lines on his face deepening, not from doubt, but from empathy. "I've always believed the sea holds memories," he said softly, "not just of storms and shipwrecks, but of the people who lived and loved and lost here. Maybe it's not so strange that you'd see what others can't." Together, they sat in companionable silence, the fire's crackle punctuating the stillness. Outside, the fog pressed against the windows, and the ocean beyond sang its endless song, a lullaby of love and loss, of endings and beginnings. Mara's eyes met Elias's, and in that shared gaze, a fragile thread of hope wove itself between them. The ghosts of the past had found their voice, and perhaps, through that haunting longing, healing was possible. But as the spectral ship vanished into the mist and the dawn approached, a question lingered in the air. Could they truly lay the past to rest, or would the ocean's depths hold them captive forever? The night held its breath, and the lighthouse stood steadfast, beacon not just against the dark sea, but against the shadows within their hearts. Elias shifted uneasily on the jagged stones beneath him, the cold seeping through his worn trousers, like the memories he'd long tried to keep buried. The ocean before him roared with relentless energy, its waves crashing against the shore with a force that seemed to echo his turmoil. He glanced sideways at Merrin, her silhouette framed by the brooding grey sky. She was quiet, her gaze fixed on the restless sea as if searching for answers within its depths. "You know," Elias began, his voice rough as gravel, "the ocean never truly rests. It pulls, it pushes, but it never stops. Kind of like the weight we carry inside." His eyes met hers, dark and shadowed. "I've held on to things for so long, things I thought I could keep locked away. But it's like the tide, you can't fight it forever. Marin's breath caught a soft sound swallowed by the wind. She reached into her satchel, fingers trembling as she pulled out a faded photograph. The edges were worn, the image blurred by time and tears. "That's my sister," she said quietly, voice barely above a whisper. "She was on the ship, the one that wrecked here all those years ago. I thought I was coming here to find closure, but I didn't realize I was just running from the truth." Elias nodded slowly, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I lost someone too," he admitted. "Not to the sea exactly, but to what it represents, the endless, unforgiving force of nature that takes and takes, leaving us to pick up the pieces. I keep the lighthouse lit for them, for the ones we lost and the ones we still carry in our hearts." The wind tugged at their clothes, carrying the scent of salt and damp earth. Marin's eyes glistened with unshed tears, the photograph trembling slightly in her hands. "I was afraid to say it out loud, that maybe, if I did, I'd lose her all over again. Sometimes, the only way to keep them close," Elias said softly, "is to let the pain in, not push it away." They sat in silence for a moment, the ocean's roar filling the space between them. Then Marin reached out, her hand brushing against Elias's. The contact was tentative but electric, a fragile bridge over the chasm of their shared grief. "What if we don't have to carry this alone anymore?" she whispered. Elias squeezed her hand gently, a faint smile breaking through his usual reserve. "Maybe the tide can bring us something new instead of just taking away." As the sky began to lighten with the first pale hues of dawn, the two found solace in each other's presence. The relentless ocean before them was no longer just a symbol of loss, but a reminder of the possibility of ebb and flow, endings and beginnings intertwined. Their confessions, once heavy and suffocating, now felt like the rising tide lifting them both toward an uncertain but hopeful horizon. And in that moment, beneath the shadowed cliffs and the watchful lighthouse, Elias and Marin took the first steps toward healing together. But as the waves whispered secrets to the shore, an unspoken question lingered in the salty air. Could the fragile trust they'd forged withstand the storms yet to come? Elias was adjusting the dials on the lighthouse's control panel when the lights blinked once, twice, then faded entirely, plunging the entire tower into an all-consuming darkness. The sudden silence was broken only by the whisper of waves crashing against the rocky shore below and the distant rumble of a retreating storm. For a heartbeat, he stood frozen, the faintest chill crawling up his spine as the familiar beacon of light vanished. "The power's out," Mara said softly from behind him, her voice barely more than a breath. She'd been examining the faded nautical charts pinned to the wall, her fingers tracing the route of the old shipwreck. Elias nodded, reaching blindly for the flashlight tucked in the corner. The beam pierced the inky blackness, revealing Mara's face softened by the warm glow of the light, her eyes wide but steady. "We'll get it back on soon," he promised, though the electrical panel stubbornly refused to respond. The lighthouse had always been a fortress against the dark, a sentinel guiding lost souls to safety. Yet now, without its beacon, it felt exposed, bare and vulnerable, mirroring the sudden fragility Elias sensed within himself. He glanced at Mara, whose presence was at once a comfort and a reminder of the solitude he'd long accepted. "Let me," she said, producing a small candle from her bag. As she struck a match, the tiny flame flickered uncertainly before steadying, casting dancing shadows on the peeling walls. Elias watched, mesmerized by the way the light played across her features, how the soft glow highlighted the slight curve of her cheek and the determination in her eyes. They settled near the lighthouse's large window, the candle between them. Outside, the storm clouds had begun to part, revealing a sliver of silver moonlight that shimmered over the restless sea. The rhythmic pulse of the waves seemed to echo the tentative beating of their hearts. "I never thought the lighthouse could feel so empty," Mara whispered, her voice thick with unspoken emotion. "Without its light, it's just a shell." Elias met her gaze, the weight of years spent alone in this tower pressing down on him. "Maybe sometimes the light has to go out," he said slowly, "so we can see what's been there all along." Mara reached out, her hand brushing against his. The contact was electric, fragile, yet undeniable. In the darkness, they were no longer just keeper and traveler. They were two souls, navigating their own shadows, seeking connection. "I've been afraid of the dark," she admitted. "Not just the night, but what it means, the unknown, the loss." He squeezed her hand gently. "Me too. But maybe it's in the darkness that we learn to trust the light we carry inside." Minutes stretched into hours as they talked quietly, sharing pieces of their pasts and the wounds they both carried, wounds tied irrevocably to the shipwreck that haunted the town and their hearts. The lighthouse, once a symbol of isolation, transformed into a sanctuary where vulnerability was not weakness, but a bridge. Outside, the first hints of dawn tinged the horizon with pale pink and gold. The power flickered back to life, and the beacon resumed its steady sweep across the water. Yet Elias and Mara barely noticed. The light they'd found in each other was far brighter than any lamp. As the sun rose, they remained seated side by side, the promise of a new day unfolding before them. The darkness had passed, but its lessons the courage to face fear. The strength in shared silence would linger long after the lighthouse's glow faded. "Whatever comes next," Elias said, "we won't face it alone." Mara smiled, her eyes reflecting the morning light. Together, and in that moment, the shadows lifted, revealing the fragile yet unbreakable bond forged in the lighthouse in the dark.